The afternoon sun hung heavy over the city, baking the sidewalks and turning parked cars into ovens. It was one of those slow, sticky Tuesdays where even the pigeons seemed too tired to flap their wings. She pulled her silver sedan over near the curb just a few feet from a fire hydrant, close enough to see it but not close enough to block it. She wasn't parked illegally, not really. She just needed a minute. Her phone had buzzed with a text from her husband, and she wanted to read it properly before driving again. He'd been working late all week and she missed him. She tapped the screen, smiling at his message. Dinner at 7? I'll bring the wine. Simple, warm, normal. She didn't notice the patrol car roll up behind her until its lights flashed. Just once, a quick blink, like a warning. She looked in the rearview mirror. A police officer stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp despite the heat. He walked toward her car with that slow, deliberate stride some officers use, the kind that says, "I'm in control here." She took a breath, turned off the engine and rolled down her window. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, voice flat. No smile, no warmth, just duty, or something pretending to be duty. "Hi, officer," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "Is everything okay?" He leaned down slightly, peering into the car like he expected to find something hidden under the seats. "You know you can't park here, right? Right next to a fire hydrant?" "I wasn't parked," she said gently. "I just pulled over to check a text." "I was about to drive off," his eyes narrowed. "You were stopped for over a minute." "That's parking," she didn't argue. Arguing never helped. She'd learned that years ago. "I apologize. I'll move right away." But instead of stepping back, he straightened up and crossed his arms. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Her stomach tightened. "Why?" "I didn't do anything wrong." "Step out," he repeated, firmer now. Now, she hesitated just for a second. She knew her rights. She also knew how quickly things could go sideways, especially when you looked like her. A black woman in a nice car, wearing a blazer and pearl earrings, speaking too clearly, too confidently. Too much like someone who might know people. She opened the door slowly, hands visible, and stood on the sidewalk. The heat hit her like a wall. She kept her posture relaxed, her voice steady. "Officer, I'm the principal at Lincoln High. I don't care what you are," he cut in, his tone sharp now. "You were parked illegally and now you're being uncooperative." "I'm not being uncooperative," she said, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. "I told you I'd move." "I'm happy to move." He stepped closer, too close. She could smell the coffee on his breath, see the sweat beading on his temple. "You think you're special? Think you can just stop wherever you want because you've got a fancy job?" She blinked. "I never said that." "You got that look," he muttered, half to himself, half to her. "Like you're better than this." She didn't respond. She knew better than to engage. But her silence seemed to irritate him more. "Put your hands behind your back," he said suddenly. "What? Why? You're under arrest. For what?" "Disorderly conduct." "Resisting arrest." She stared at him. "I haven't resisted anything. I haven't even raised my voice." "You questioned my authority," he said, pulling out handcuffs. "That's resistance where I come from." Her heart pounded, but she didn't panic. Panic got people hurt. She'd seen it. She'd read the reports. She'd comforted students whose parents never came home from a routine stop. So she did what she'd taught her students to do in crisis. Breathe. Observe, remember. She placed her hands behind her back without a word. The metal cuffs clicked shut, tight but not brutal. Not yet. He patted her down quickly, impersonally, then walked her to the back of his cruiser. A few people on the sidewalk slowed down, watching. One woman pulled out her phone. The officer saw her and glared. She lowered it. As he opened the back door, she asked quietly, "Can I call my husband?" "No calls until you're processed," he said, pushing her head down slightly as she got in. It wasn't rough, but it was unnecessary. Humiliating. She sat on the hot vinyl seat, the smell of stale sweat and cleaning chemicals filling her nose. He slammed the door and walked back to her car. She watched through the window as he rifled through her glove compartment, then her purse. He pulled out her wallet, flipped it open, glanced at her driver's license. His eyes lingered on her last name for a second. Maybe he recognized it, maybe not. But he tossed the wallet onto the passenger seat like it was trash. Back at his car, he radioed in. "Unit 42, I've got a 1093. Female, black, mid-40s, arrested for disorderly conduct and resisting. Transporting to the 12th. Static crackled, then a dispatcher's voice. Copy that, 42. Anything else? Nope. Just another Tuesday. She closed her eyes. She thought about her students, the ones who walked home scared, the ones who practiced the talk with their parents like it was a fire drill. She thought about her husband, probably still in his office, unaware that his wife was sitting in the back of a squad car for no reason other than the color of her skin and the tone of her voice. The car pulled away from the curb. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give him that. But inside something broke, not her spirit but her illusion. She'd always believed that if you played by the rules, dressed right, spoke politely, worked hard, you'd be treated fairly. She'd built her life on that belief. She'd told her students the same thing. But here she was, arrested for checking a text message, for asking a simple question, for existing while black in a space that clearly didn't welcome her. The officer drove in silence. No explanation, no apology, just the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. She memorized his badge number, stitched on his chest, clear as day. She noted the time, 3:17 p.m. She remembered the way he'd smirked when he said, "Know your place." She stored it all away, like evidence. When they reached the precinct, he pulled into the back lot where the public couldn't see. He opened the door, yanked her out by the elbow, not hard enough to bruise, but enough to show dominance. She walked calmly beside him, heels clicking on the concrete. Inside, the air conditioning hit her like a slap. The station buzzed with low chatter, ringing phones, the smell of bad coffee and old carpet. He led her to the booking desk, where a tired-looking sergeant barely glanced up from his computer. "Got one for you," the officer said, almost cheerful. "Says she's a school principal. Thinks the rules don't apply." The sergeant finally looked at her. His eyes flicked over her blouse, her earrings, her calm expression. He didn't say anything, just nodded and handed her a form. "Name?" he asked flatly. She gave it. He typed it in slowly like he didn't believe her. When he asked for her address, she gave it. The same one listed on her license, the one in the quiet neighborhood with the oak trees and the two-car garage. The kind of address people assumed meant safety, respect, immunity. But not today. They took her fingerprints. They took her photo. They emptied her pockets, phone, keys, a tube of lipstick, a mint. They didn't find drugs. They didn't find weapons. They found a woman who'd done nothing wrong. "Wait in cell 3, the sergeant said, pointing down a short hallway. She walked there alone. The cell was small concrete walls, a metal bench bolted to the floor. No window, just a flickering fluorescent light overhead. She sat down, back straight, hands in her lap. She didn't fidget. She didn't pace. She waited, and she thought. She thought about how many women had sat in this exact spot. Mothers, daughters, teachers, nurses, arrested for reasons just as flimsy. She thought about how easy it would have been to scream, to fight, to make a scene. But she also knew that would have given them exactly what they wanted. An excuse. So she stayed quiet. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to choose her battles. Hours passed. No one came to explain. No one offered water. No one let her call anyone. She asked once politely and was told, "When we're ready." She watched the clock on the wall through the bars. 45 on 15, 6:02. And then, finally, footsteps, heavy, fast, purposeful. A man in a dark suit appeared at the end of the hall, tall, broad-shouldered, face tight with controlled fury. His eyes locked onto hers the second he saw her. She stood up slowly. He didn't say a word to the desk sergeant. Didn't flash a badge. Just walked straight to cell 3, unlocked it with a key he pulled from his pocket, and stepped inside. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then he reached out and gently touched her arm like he needed to make sure she was real. "I got your missed call," he said, voice low, rough with emotion. "I've been looking everywhere." She nodded, throat tight. "I'm okay." He turned to the hallway, his voice suddenly sharp, commanding, the voice she rarely heard at home. "Release her now, and pull every camera feed from the last 2 hours. Every body cam. Every lobby cam. Every damn frame." The sergeant scrambled to his feet. "Sir, I didn't realize it. You didn't need to realize," he cut in. "You needed to do your job." He turned back to her, his expression softening. "Let's go home." But as they walked out of that cell, past the stunned officers, past the flickering lights and the cold linoleum floor, she knew they weren't just going home. Something had changed and it wouldn't be undone. The walk out of the precinct felt longer than it should have. Every step echoed on the tile floor, and every officer they passed seemed to freeze for just a second. Eyes wide, jaws tight, suddenly very interested in paperwork or coffee cups. She kept her head up, shoulders back, not out of pride, but because she refused to let them see her shaken. Not here. Not now. Her husband didn't say much as they stepped outside into the warm evening air. He just held her elbow gently, guiding her toward his unmarked sedan parked at the curb. The city hummed around them, cars honking, a bus rumbling down the street, distant laughter from a sidewalk cafe. Normal life continuing as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed. He opened the passenger door for her, then walked around and got in behind the wheel. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. She watched his jaw work, the way his breath came in short, controlled bursts. She knew that look. It wasn't anger, not the hot, explosive kind. It was something colder, deeper, the kind that builds systems, that rewrites rules, that waits. You okay? He finally asked, voice low. She nodded. Physically, yes. Mentally, I'm still processing. He reached over and squeezed her hand. His palm was warm, calloused from years of service. I should have answered that call right away. I was in a strategy meeting, budget cuts, staffing shortages, and I silenced my phone. By the time I saw your missed call, it was too late. It's not your fault, she said softly. You didn't put me in that cell. No, he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. But I'm part of the system that did. She didn't argue. She knew he meant it. He'd spent his whole career trying to fix things from the inside, pushing for better training, fairer policies, more accountability. But tonight the system had failed her, and that cut deeper than any insult from the officer who arrested her. He started the car and pulled away from the curb. The drive home was quiet but not uncomfortable. They'd been married long enough to know when silence was healing, not avoidance. She stared out the window, watching streetlights blur past, thinking about the way the booking officer had looked at her. Not with suspicion exactly, but with indifference. Like she was just another file, another number, another problem to be processed and forgotten. When they got home, he made tea, her favorite chamomile, and set it on the coffee table without a word. She sat on the couch, still in the same clothes she'd worn all day, the cuffs of her blazer wrinkled from the cell bench. He sat beside her, close but not touching, giving her space to breathe. After a while, she spoke. He didn't even read me my rights, just slapped the cuffs on and said, "You're under arrest." When I asked why, he said I was being disrespectful. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just asked a question. He nodded slowly. I've seen it before. Not always this blatant, but the pattern's there. Assume guilt. Assume threat. Assume you don't belong. She took a sip of tea. It was too hot, but she didn't care. What happens now? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. First, I recuse myself from any internal investigation. Can't be involved, it'd look like favoritism, even if it's my wife. But I'm calling the head of the Civilian Oversight Board first thing tomorrow. They've got real power now thanks to the reforms last year. She looked at him. You think they'll actually do something? I don't know, he admitted. But we're not letting this go. Not this time, she believed him. He wasn't the kind of man who made empty promises. But she also knew how these things usually ended. Complaint filed, investigation dragged out, officer given a slap on the wrist, case quietly closed. She'd seen it happen to friends, to colleagues, to strangers on the news. The system protected its own. Still, something felt different this time. Maybe it was because she hadn't broken down. Maybe it was because she'd stayed calm, collected, observant. Or maybe it was because her husband, someone with real influence, was now personally invested. Later that night, after she'd showered and changed into soft pajamas, she sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. She wrote down everything she could remember. The time she pulled over. The officer's exact words, the color of his eyes, the way he stood. The names of the other officers she saw at the precinct. The sequence of events during booking. She wrote it all in clear, simple sentences like she was preparing a lesson plan for her students. Facts, details, evidence. Her husband watched from the doorway, arms crossed. You're going to make them regret this, aren't you? She looked up, pen in hand. Not for revenge. For the next woman who gets pulled over for no reason. For the teenager who gets stopped walking home from school. For everyone who doesn't have someone like you to walk into that precinct and say, "Release her." Most people don't. He came over and kissed the top of her head. "Then we'll make sure they hear you." The next morning she went to work. She didn't call in sick. She put on a crisp white blouse, her favorite pearl earrings, and drove to Lincoln High like any other day. Her students didn't know what had happened, but they noticed something different, the way she held herself, the quiet intensity in her voice during morning announcements. At lunch, she met with the school counselor, a longtime friend who'd known her for 20 years. Over salads in the staff lounge, she told her everything. The counselor listened without interrupting, her face growing grimmer with each detail. "You should sue," she said bluntly. "Not just for you, for all of us." "I'm thinking about it," she replied. "But lawsuits take time, money, energy, and even if we win, will it change anything?" "Maybe not everything," the counselor said, "but it'll make people pay attention. And sometimes that's how change starts." That afternoon, her husband called. He'd spoken to the oversight board. They were opening a formal investigation. They wanted to meet with her the next day. They also wanted the body cam footage, the 911 logs, the radio transmissions, everything. "They're taking it seriously," he said, sounding almost surprised. "Good," she said. "Because I am." Meanwhile, word began to spread. Not through official channels, but the way news always spreads in tight-knit communities. Through texts, group chats, whispered conversations at bus stops and barbershops. "You hear about the principal? The one married to the deputy chief? Got arrested for sitting in her car." People were angry. Not surprised, just angry. Again, a local reporter reached out. She declined an interview for now. "I want facts first," she told her husband. Not headlines, but the story was already growing legs. By evening, a short clip surfaced online, grainy, shot from a cell phone by the woman on the sidewalk during the arrest. It showed her stepping out of the car calmly, hands visible, then being cuffed without resistance. The caption read, "Arrested for checking a text? This is America in 2024. The video didn't go viral, not yet, but it got shared enough to rattle the department. That night, her husband came home with a folder full of printouts. Internal complaint records, duty logs, past incidents involving the same officer. 2 complaints in the last 3 years. One from a black nurse pulled over for driving while professional. Another from a college student stopped for matching a vague description. Both dismissed. Both labeled unfounded. He's been skating by, her husband said, voice tight. And now he's gotten careless. She looked at the photo of the officer, clean-cut, smiling in his academy graduation picture. She wondered what he told his family at dinner. Did he mention arresting a school principal? Did he laugh about it? The next day, she met with the oversight board in a small conference room downtown. 3 civilians, 2 women, 1 man, sat across from her, not in uniforms but in business casual clothes. They weren't cops. They were teachers, lawyers, community organizers, people who answered to the public, not the department. She told her story again, this time with notes in hand. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She just laid out the facts, clear and steady. When she finished, the woman in the middle, a retired high school principal herself, leaned forward. "Thank you," she said, "not just for coming in, but for remembering everything. Most people are too scared or too overwhelmed to recall details. You gave us a roadmap." They asked if she'd be willing to press criminal charges for false imprisonment. She said yes. They asked if she'd consider a civil rights lawsuit. She said she was consulting a lawyer. They asked if she wanted to remain anonymous. She shook her head. "If I hide," she said, "it sends the message that this is something to be ashamed of, but I did nothing wrong. He's the one who should be ashamed." On the drive home, she felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who'd been made to feel small by someone with a badge. Every person told to know their place. That evening, her husband cooked dinner. Pasta, garlic bread, a simple salad. They ate at the kitchen table the same way they had for 20 years. No grand speeches, no dramatic vows. Just 2 people who loved each other, trying to make sense of a broken moment. After dinner, she stood on the back porch watching fireflies blink in the yard. He joined her, handing her a glass of iced tea. "You're not alone in this," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I need to do my part." "Not as your wife." "As me," he nodded. "I know." Inside the house, the phone rang. It was the reporter again. This time she answered. "Yes," she said. I'll talk to you. Because silence had protected people like that officer for too long. And she was done being quiet. The morning the story broke, the city woke up to something it couldn't ignore. Not because it was shocking, people had seen this before, but because it was undeniable. The local news ran the cell phone footage during the 6 a.m. broadcast. A woman in a blazer stepping calmly from her car, hands visible, speaking in a steady voice, then being cuffed by an officer who never once explained why. The reporter didn't sensationalize it. She just played the clip, read the facts, and quoted the oversight board's statement. "We are treating this matter with the highest level of seriousness." By noon, the video had been shared thousands of times. Not with rage-filled captions, but with quiet disbelief. This happened to a school principal? She was just reading a text. What if it was your mom? Your sister? She didn't watch the coverage. She was at school, sitting in a parent-teacher conference, listening to a worried father talk about his son's anxiety. She smiled, took notes, offered resources. Outside, the world was talking about her. Inside room 214, she was just the principal. Steady, kind, present. But the ripple was real. Students whispered in hallways. Teachers glanced at her with new respect, or maybe just new understanding. One sophomore slipped a folded note into her mailbox during lunch. "You're brave. My cousin got arrested last year for no reason, too. Thank you for speaking up." She tucked it into her desk drawer and blinked back tears. Her husband called during her planning period. "It's moving faster than I expected," he said. "The chief just issued a public statement. He suspended the officer without pay pending investigation." "Good," she said. "But suspension isn't enough." "I know," he replied. "The oversight board is pushing for criminal charges. False imprisonment, filing a false police report. They've got the body cam footage now. It's worse than we thought." She closed her eyes. "What did it show?" "He never told you why you were being detained. He mocked your job. He said, 'You think you're special?' And when you asked to call me, he laughed and said, 'Go ahead, call your lawyer.' He had no idea." She exhaled slowly. "Of course he didn't. To him, I was just another black woman in a car. Not someone with a name. Not someone with a husband who wears the same badge he does." There was silence on the line for a moment. Then he said, "I've been asked to step aside from all command decisions related to this case. Even though I recused myself, they're being extra careful." "That's fair," she said. "We need this to be clean. No room for 'he got special treatment' rumors." "You're thinking 3 steps ahead," he said, almost smiling. "I have to," she replied. "Because if this falls apart, it won't just be my story that gets buried. It'll be every story like it." That afternoon, a lawyer came to the school. Not flashy, not expensive looking. Just a woman in a simple suit with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She represented a civil rights firm that took on police misconduct cases pro bono when they believed in the cause. They met in the library after school, surrounded by shelves of books and the faint smell of old paper. The lawyer laid out her options: file a federal lawsuit under Section 1983 for violation of constitutional rights, seek damages for emotional distress and false arrest, and push for policy changes as part of any settlement. "You don't have to do this alone," the lawyer said, "and you don't have to rush. But if you're willing to go public, your case could set a precedent." "I'm not doing it for money," she said. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to someone who doesn't have a voice." The lawyer nodded. "Then we'll frame it that way. Not just about you, about the system that let this happen." As they talked, a group of students walked by the library window, laughing, backpacks slung over their shoulders. She watched them, carefree, unaware that their principal had spent the night before writing down every detail of her humiliation like it was homework. She thought about how many of them had already been followed in stores, questioned by security, told to act less threatening. How many would be pulled over before they turned 20? "I'll do it," she said finally. "But I want to control the narrative. No victim language, no pity, just truth," the lawyer smiled. "That's exactly how we'll do it." Over the next few days, the city shifted. Community meetings filled up. Local pastors organized a peaceful vigil outside the precinct. Not angry, just present. Signs read, "Respect starts with seeing people, and protect and serve everyone." Even some off-duty officers showed up, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, faces unreadable. The officer who arrested her didn't speak to the press. His union issued a vague statement about due process and not rushing to judgment. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling. Two other officers came forward, quietly, through the oversight board, saying they'd heard him make similar comments before. One recalled him joking in the locker room about booking a queen for fun just hours before her arrest. That phrase, booking a queen for fun, spread like wildfire. It wasn't just offensive. It was proof this wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, cruel, and meant to entertain. Her husband came home one night looking exhausted. He'd been called into an emergency command meeting. They're talking about mandatory retraining, he said, rubbing his temples. De-escalation, implicit bias, cultural competency. Not just a 1-hour video. Real training with outside experts. Will they actually do it? She asked. They have to, he said. The mayor's office is under pressure. The school board called me today. They're worried about student trust in law enforcement, especially with our school resource officers. She nodded. Good. Because if kids don't feel safe around police, how can they learn? Later that week, she agreed to her first interview. Not with a tabloid, not with a sensationalist outlet, but with a respected local journalist known for fair, in-depth reporting. They met in a quiet cafe downtown, away from cameras, just two women at a corner table. The journalist didn't lead with, "How did it feel?" She started with, "What do you want people to understand?" She thought for a moment that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was the result of a culture that treats certain people as suspects first, humans second. I wasn't arrested because I broke a law. I was arrested because I didn't act grateful enough for being questioned. Because I asked a question back. Because I wore my wedding ring and my blazer like I belonged in that neighborhood. And maybe that threatened him. The journalist wrote it exactly like that. The article ran on the front page Sunday morning. No photo of her crying. No dramatic headlines. Just her words, clear and calm, next to a small quote from the oversight board. This case highlights the urgent need for systemic reform. The response was overwhelming, not in volume, but in depth. Letters poured into the newspaper. A retired judge wrote, "I've seen good officers and bad. This wasn't policing. This was power abuse." A young cop emailed the journalist, "I joined to help people. Stories like this make me question if I can fix this from the inside." Even more powerful were the private messages. A nurse wrote, "Last year I was stopped while driving home from a night shift." Same tone, same smirk. "I didn't report it because I thought no one would care. Thank you for making me feel seen." A college student shared how she'd been followed in a department store just last week. They acted like I was stealing just because I browsed the expensive section. She read every message. Saved them all. Not for herself, but as proof. This wasn't about one bad officer. It was about a pattern so common it had become invisible, until someone with a platform refused to stay silent. Her husband watched her carefully. He saw the weight she carried, the way she stayed up late answering emails, the way she flinched slightly when a siren passed the house. But he also saw her strength, the way she stood taller in meetings, the way she spoke with students about justice now, not just discipline. One evening, as they washed dishes side by side, he said, "You've changed." She looked at him, soapy water dripping from her hands. "Have I?" "You used to believe the system could be fixed with patience," he said. "Now you know it needs pressure," she nodded. "Patience is a luxury not everyone can afford. Sometimes you have to shake the table to get a seat at it." He smiled faintly. "I'm proud of you." "I'm not doing it for pride," she said. "I'm doing it so the next woman doesn't have to sit in that cell wondering if anyone will believe her." The oversight board scheduled a public hearing. Not a trial, just a disciplinary review. But it would be live-streamed. The officer would have to answer questions. The footage would be shown. And she would be there not as a victim but as a witness. She prepared like she was prepping for a school board presentation. She reviewed the timeline. Practiced her testimony. Rehearsed staying calm if he lied or deflected. She knew he'd probably say she was aggressive or uncooperative. She'd heard it before. In staff meetings, in parent conferences, in life. When a black woman speaks firmly, some people call it anger. When she asks for clarity, they call it defiance. But this time the truth had a paper trail, a video trail, a witness trail. The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch again, wrapped in a light sweater, watching the stars. Her husband joined her, handing her a mug of warm milk, his old remedy for her insomnia. Nervous? He asked. A little, she admitted. Not for me. For what comes after? If they let him go with a warning, it sends a message this behavior is acceptable. If they fire him but no one else changes, it's just one man's fall, not a systems reckoning. He sat beside her. Then we keep pushing. Lawsuit, policy changes, community oversight. One case won't fix everything. But it can crack the door open. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I just hope it's enough. It's a start, he said. And starts matter. The next morning, she put on her best suit. The navy one with the subtle pinstripe. Not to impress, but to show she was serious. She pinned her school ID to her lapel, right next to her wedding ring. Symbols of who she was. Educator, wife, citizen. As they drove to City Hall, sirens wailed in the distance. She didn't flinch. She just looked out the window and said, "Let's go make sure today matters." The City Hall hearing room was packed. Not with reporters or protesters, but with ordinary people. Teachers, nurses, retirees, students, who'd taken time off work or skipped lunch to be there. They sat quietly in folding chairs, some holding printed copies of the Oversight Board's public notice, others just watching, listening, bearing witness. There were no chants, no signs, no shouting, just presence. And presence, she knew, could be louder than noise. She walked in with her lawyer, not arm in arm, but side by side. Two women in dark suits, calm, focused. Cameras clicked softly near the back, but no one shoved a mic in her face. The board had set ground rules. Respectful decorum, no interruptions, facts over feelings. It wasn't a courtroom, but it felt like one. The officer sat at a small table across the room, flanked by his union rep and a city attorney. He wore civilian clothes, khakis and a polo shirt, but his posture was stiff, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't look at her. Not once. The board chair, a retired judge with silver hair and steady hands, opened the session. This hearing is to review the conduct of Officer Derek Rollins during the traffic stop and arrest of Ms. Thompson on June 18th. We will examine body cam footage, radio logs, witness statements, and hear testimony from both parties. Our goal is not punishment but accountability and prevention. Then they played the video. It started with her car idling near the hydrant, her window rolling down, her voice clear and polite. "Hi, officer. Is everything okay?" The officer's flat reply. The escalation. The moment he said, "You think you're special?" The way he cuffed her without warning. The smirk as he told the dispatcher, "Just another Tuesday." A murmur rippled through the room. Not angry, disappointed. Like watching someone you trusted break a promise. When it ended, the room was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then the board chair turned to the officer. "Officer Rollins, do you recognize this footage?" "Yes," he said, voice tight. "Is it accurate?" "Yes." "Then explain why you arrested Ms. Thompson." He shifted in his seat. "She was parked illegally, and when I asked her to step out, she became argumentative." "Argumentative how?" the chair asked. "She questioned my authority. Said, 'Why am I being detained?' That's resisting." The chair turned to her. "Ms. Thompson, is that what you said?" "Yes," she replied, voice steady. I asked him, "Why am I being detained?" I did not raise my voice. I did not refuse to comply. I stepped out when asked. I placed my hands behind my back when instructed. "Did you ever threaten the officer?" "No." "Did you ever swear or use aggressive language?" "No." "Did you ever attempt to walk away or re-enter your vehicle?" "No." The chair nodded. Then came the rookie officer's statement, read aloud by the board's investigator. The young man, still on probation, had come forward after seeing the news. He described how in the locker room that morning Officer Rollins had joked, "Gonna book a queen for fun today. Someone who thinks she's too good for this neighborhood." He said others laughed. No one reported it. The officer at the table went pale. His union rep whispered something, but he just shook his head. Then her lawyer played a second clip, the audio from the precinct booking desk. After she'd been cuffed, the officer had leaned toward a colleague and said, "Teach her a lesson. These educated ones always think they're above the law." Gasps. Quiet ones, but real. The officer finally looked up, right at her. Not with shame, but with something worse, defiance. Like he still believed he'd done nothing wrong. The board didn't react. They just took notes, asked more questions, reviewed the logs showing she'd been stopped for 68 seconds before being ordered out of the car, well under the city's 3-minute grace period for temporary stops. They noted that no citation was ever issued for the alleged hydrant violation. They highlighted that her license, registration, and insurance were all valid. By the time testimony ended, the facts were undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was profiling, it was humiliation disguised as procedure, and it was done for sport. The board recessed for deliberation. She stepped outside for air, standing on the stone steps of City Hall. A group of high school students from her school stood at the bottom, holding handmade signs. "We believe you and our principal deserves respect." One girl ran up and hugged her, brief, fierce, full of quiet solidarity. Back inside, the board returned within the hour. Their recommendation was clear: immediate termination, revocation of police certification, and referral to the district attorney for criminal charges of false imprisonment and filing a false report. It wasn't a verdict. It was a recommendation. The police chief would have to approve it. The city manager would have to sign off. But in a town where oversight boards were often ignored, this was seismic. News spread fast. By evening, the chief held a press conference. He stood at a podium, flanked by the mayor and the head of the oversight board. "Effective immediately," he said, "Officer Rollins is terminated. His badge is revoked. We do not tolerate abuse of power. We do not tolerate racial profiling. And we will not look away when it happens in our own ranks." The crowd outside clapped, not wildly but firmly, like they'd been waiting years to hear those words. Her husband came home that night with takeout and tired eyes. "They're really doing it," he said, setting down the bag. "No delays. No further review. He's out." She nodded, stirring her noodles. "Good, but termination is just the beginning." "I know," he said. The DA's office called. "They're reviewing the case for criminal charges." She looked up. "Do you think they'll file?" "They have to," he said. "The evidence is too clear. But even if they only go for misdemeanors, it sets a precedent. Officers can't just lie on reports and walk away." Over the next week, the city council fast-tracked 3 new policies: mandatory body cams activated for all stops, civilian oversight of internal affairs investigations, and quarterly bias training led by independent experts, not department veterans. The school board invited her to co-chair a new committee on student police relations, reevaluating the role of resource officers in schools. She said yes to all of it. Not because she wanted more work, but because she knew silence was complicity. Then came the lawsuit. Her legal team filed in federal court, not just seeking damages, but demanding systemic changes as part of any settlement. Public reporting of all use of force incidents, anonymous complaint systems for civilians, and a fund to support victims of police misconduct. The city didn't fight it. They knew they'd lose. Within 2 months, they agreed to a settlement, confidential amount but with binding policy reforms. She donated every dollar to a local nonprofit that provided legal aid to people wrongfully arrested. Reporters asked why she didn't keep the money. "Because this was never about me getting paid," she said in a rare interview. "It was about making sure the next person doesn't have to go through this alone." Her husband watched her carefully during those weeks. He saw the toll, the nightmares, the jumpiness at sudden noises, the way she double-checked locks now. But he also saw her purpose deepen. She started speaking at community forums, not as a victim, but as a partner in change. She met with young officers in training, sharing her story not to shame but to teach. One evening, after a long meeting with city planners about redesigning precinct waiting areas to feel less like jails, she sat on their porch again, quiet. He brought her tea. "You've done enough," he said gently. She shook her head. "Enough isn't the point. The point is continuing." He sat beside her. "What do you want most now?" She thought for a long time. "I want a world where my students don't have to practice the talk like it's a fire drill. Where a woman can sit in her car and read a text from her husband without fear. Where an officer sees a person first, not a threat, not a stereotype, just a person." He took her hand. "That's a big dream." "It is," she said, smiling faintly. "But dreams start with one person refusing to look away." A few weeks later, the district attorney announced charges: 2 counts of misdemeanor false imprisonment and 1 count of filing a false police report. The officer pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. His trial was set for the fall. She didn't plan to attend. She'd said her piece. The system would have to do the rest. But then something unexpected happened. A young woman, a college student, was pulled over 2 blocks from campus. Same officer's old beat, same vague, suspicious behavior claim. But this time the student knew her rights. She recorded the stop. She stayed calm. And when the officer tried to escalate, a passing patrol car, driven by a new recruit, intervened. Later, the recruit told reporters, "I remembered what happened to the principal. I remembered her saying, 'Know your power and use it right.' So I did." The story made the local news, small but significant, a ripple becoming a wave. She read about it over breakfast, tears in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from hope. Her husband saw her expression. "That's why you did it, isn't it?" She nodded, so someone else could stand up. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Outside, the sun rose over the city. Same streets, same buildings, but something shifting beneath the surface. Not fixed, not perfect, but changing, and that, she thought, was worth every hard moment. The trial lasted 3 days. Not because the facts were complicated, they weren't, but because the system moved slowly even when it knew the truth. She didn't attend. She'd already given her testimony to the oversight board, and her lawyer assured her it was enough. Besides, she had a school to run, students to guide, a life to rebuild. Watching the man who had humiliated her try to explain himself didn't feel like justice. It felt like reliving a wound. In the end, the jury came back with a verdict: guilty on all counts. But the sentence was lighter than many hoped. 300 hours of community service, 2 years probation, and a permanent bar from law enforcement. No jail time. The judge called it proportionate, citing the officer's clean record and years of service. To some, it felt like a slap on the wrist. To others, it was the first time an officer in the city had ever been criminally punished for false arrest. She read the news over morning coffee, expression unreadable. Her husband watched her from across the kitchen table. "You're disappointed," he said. She shook her head slowly. "Not disappointed, realistic. I never expected prison. But I did hope the message would be clear. You can't treat people like this and walk away untouched." And he didn't, he reminded her. He lost his job, his pension, his career. His name is public record now. Every future employer will see it. She sipped her coffee. Maybe. But the real test isn't what happened to him. It's what happens next. And next came faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, the city council passed the Dignity in Policing Act, a package of reforms born directly from her case. Body cams had to be activated during every stop. Supervisors had to review footage weekly. Citizens could file complaints online anonymously with guaranteed follow-up. Most importantly, the police department now reported monthly data on stops, searches and arrests broken down by race, gender, and neighborhood, published on the city website for everyone to see. Transparency, she thought, was the first step toward trust. She was invited to speak at the signing ceremony, not as a victim but as a partner. She stood at the podium in City Hall, same room where the hearing had been held, and looked out at a crowd that included officers, activists, students, and city leaders. "I didn't ask for this spotlight," she began, voice calm but firm. "I just wanted to go home after checking a text from my husband. But since I'm here, I'll say this. Accountability isn't punishment. It's repair. And repair starts when we stop pretending the system works for everyone when it clearly doesn't." She didn't call for anger. She called for action. Train better. Listen harder. See people, not just suspects. And when you see something wrong, say something, even if it's your partner, especially if it's your partner. Afterward, a young officer approached her, cap in hand. "My academy class watched your testimony," he said. "We're required to now. It changed how I think about my job." She smiled. Then it was worth it. Back at school, things had shifted too. Students were more open about their fears. Teachers held classroom discussions about justice, bias, and civic responsibility. The school board approved a new elective, community and law, co-taught by a civics teacher and a retired public defender. She helped design the curriculum, but her biggest project came quietly over dinner one night. "What if we created something lasting?" she asked her husband. Not just policy, but possibility. He knew what she meant. "A scholarship?" "Yes, for young women, especially young women of color, who want to study law, public policy, or education. Women who want to change systems from the inside." They didn't wait for permission. They used part of the settlement funds, her share, which she'd kept only for this purpose, and partnered with the local university. They called it the Dignity Scholarship. First recipient, a senior from her school, the daughter of a single mother who'd once been wrongfully detained during a traffic stop herself. At the award ceremony, the girl stood nervously at the mic. "I used to think law enforcement was something to fear," she said. "But seeing what Ms. Thompson did, standing up with grace, demanding change without hate, it made me believe I could be part of the solution." Afterward, the girl hugged her tightly. "Thank you for making space for people like me." That night, she cried for the first time since the arrest. Not from pain, but from hope. Her husband found her on the porch again, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the stars. "You did it," he said softly. "No," she replied. "We're just getting started." And they were. Over the next year, the changes rippled outward. Other cities reached out, asking how they'd passed their reforms. She spoke at conferences, not as a celebrity, but as a practitioner. She shared templates for complaint systems, training modules, community feedback loops. She never said, "Do what I did." She said, "Ask your neighbors what they need, then build it together." Her husband, still in his role but now leading a new office of professional standards, implemented the Dignity Protocol across the department. New recruits spent their first week riding with social workers, not just patrol cars. Veteran officers took refresher courses led by community members, not lectures but conversations. One sergeant admitted, "I didn't realize how much I assumed until I heard people's stories. Even the precinct changed." The holding cells were repainted in calming colors. Water and snacks were offered during processing. A civilian liaison sat at the front desk, trained to de-escalate and connect people with resources, not just paperwork. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks. Budget fights, pushback from old guard officers, days when progress felt invisible, but the foundation was laid. Then 2 years after the arrest, something small but powerful happened. A rookie officer, fresh out of the academy, barely 23, was patrolling near the downtown library when he saw a teenager lingering near a parked car. The teen was black, wearing a hoodie, glancing around. Old habits might have kicked in. Stop him, question him, run his ID. But this officer remembered his training. He remembered the case study they'd studied in week 3, the principal and the patrol stop. So instead of approaching with suspicion, he walked over and said, "Hey, everything okay? You look like you're waiting for someone." The teen, startled, nodded. "My mom's running late. She's picking me up after my study group." The officer smiled. "Cool. Library's got great Wi-Fi if you need to kill time. Just don't block the hydrant, yeah?" The teen laughed. "Yes, sir." Later, the rookie wrote in his field report, "No incident. Just a kid waiting for his mom." And he filed it honestly. When her husband read that report during his weekly review, he showed it to her. "This," he said, "is what we were fighting for." She touched the paper gently, one officer choosing to see a person, not a problem. Years passed. The scholarship grew. The reforms became routine. The officer who'd arrested her faded from headlines, working odd jobs out of state. His name now a footnote in training manuals. She never forgot that day. The heat, the cuffs, the silence of the cell, but she refused to let it define her. Instead, she let it fuel her. Now when she walked the halls of her school, students didn't just see a principal. They saw proof that one person's courage could move a system. Teachers saw a leader who turned pain into purpose. And in quiet moments, she saw herself, not as a symbol, but as a woman who chose to speak when silence would have been easier. One spring afternoon, she stood at a graduation ceremony, watching her first Dignity Scholar walk across the stage, headed to law school, determined to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. The crowd cheered. The girl beamed. Afterward, the young woman found her in the crowd. "I got accepted to a summer internship with the public defender's office," she said, eyes shining. "They said my application stood out because of the scholarship essay." "I wrote about you. What did you say?" she asked. "I said you taught me that justice isn't about being loud. It's about being clear and consistent and kind, even when you're angry." She hugged the young woman tightly. "Then you've already learned the most important lesson." That evening, she and her husband sat on their porch again, just like they had so many times before. The air was warm, the sky streaked with orange and pink. Fireflies blinked in the yard. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "I don't. Because I know what would have happened if I stayed silent, nothing. And nothing helps no one. He took her hand. You changed more than policies. You changed how people see each other. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Maybe, but real change isn't mine alone. It's everyone who chose to listen, to act, to believe things could be different. In the distance, a siren wailed, brief, then fading. She didn't flinch. She just watched the fireflies steady and glowing in the dusk, because the work wasn't done. It never really is. But now there were more hands holding the light, and that made all the difference.